This is our water use efficiency standard workshop number 4. We've had three of these before, and it's just a time to go in depth into the water use efficiency standards. All right, next slide. There we go. Here's our quick agenda. Welcome. We have a really good agenda for you today. We're going to go over just a summary of everything that's going on in the water use efficiency standards and their current timeline. We're going to share a little bit about water use efficiency, indoor water use efficiency. Most of us know, I think, that comments went in early this month, and we're awaiting response from DWR on how they respond to those comments. And then we have Nate here from Santa Margarita Water District, and he's going to go over landscape review and calculations in a tool that he's developed. And then we have Amy Talbot here. She's going to go over water loss regulations and where we are with that. And then Lisa Madaus is going to go over our CII classifications and dedicated irrigation meters. And then at the end, we're going to have breakout rooms. And so we may have less time for questioning or no time for questioning in the first part of this workshop, but just know at the end we're going to have breakout rooms. You can go into to cover all these items, and we'll have plenty of time for questions and discussion there, and then we'll have a wrap up. Next slide, please. Okay. So just the Zoom rules. If you can put your first and last name on the Zoom so we know who you are, that would be great, so we can see who you're talking to. When you're speaking, if you could turn on your video, that would be great. Again, if you're not talking, please stay on mute. And then you can also open the chat panel if you want to put a question in there or a comment. And then we'll get started. Next slide, please. Next slide. Just a really high overview of the water use efficiency standards. As we know, the water use objectives are going to be based on indoor use targets, outdoor use targets, water loss targets, plus variances, plus bonuses. In addition to the water use objective, there's also going to be best practices developed for commercial and industrial institutions. And so we're going to cover all of that today. October 21 is the date that DWR has to make recommendations to the State Water Resources Control Board. We'll see if they get to that date and make those recommendations. June 2022 is when the State Board is scheduled to adopt the water use efficiency standards. Again, DWR is just making recommendations to the State Board, and the State Board is responsible for adopting final regulations. And January 1 of 2024 is when agencies first have to calculate their targets. And then January 1 of 2027 is when you need to be achieving the urban water use objective, or you could be subject to fines and penalties. Next slide, please. So this is a little bit more timeline. And again, we have the water loss standards. They were originally supposed to be done mid-2020. That's been pushed back several times. And now, Amy, I'll give you some more details, but sometime in 2021, we expect them to start the regulatory process on that. Recommended indoor standards. We were supposed to get those in January of 2021. Again, now they're saying June of 2021, but there's still some question about that. And then residential irrigated landscape measurements were supposed to come from DWR in January 2021. Those came in March of 2021. So you kind of see a trend here that we're kind of pushing a lot of these deadlines. And so moving forward, just be aware that that might continue. So next slide, please. We have a lot going on. The good news is DWR has really ramped up their outreach to stakeholders. They're having monthly meetings on CII and variances. They're trying to do some smaller breakout type meetings, work group meetings to get better feedback. So we really appreciate that they're making that effort. with that, we plan to see them, again, continue to move forward, trying to meet that October deadline. Indoor standards, they did release the draft report in May with comments due June 4th, and then they're supposed to release their final report in June. We've heard that that might be pushed back, and there might be another workshop to kind of address the comments that DWA received about the indoor report. Outdoor standards, tomorrow is a big day for outdoor standards. Not only do agencies need to get their comments back into DWR on their landscape area measurements, but there's also a standards and methodology workgroup meeting on those tomorrow, going over what DWR's initial recommendation on outdoor standards are going to be. CII performance measures. Our last meeting was earlier this week, where they went over CII meetings, classification of mixed use meter conversions. Again, Lisa's going to go over that. Varies and bonuses, that's July 8th is the next meeting on that. And then water loss, we'll Amy cover that, and then we're still kind of waiting to see when that's going to start. And then water supply and demand assessment, they just came out with an email not too long ago that says they're planning to have a July draft document and an August workshop. Next slide, please. One of the things that we're working closely with the associations, including Aqua, and we're trying to be proactive about some of the recommendations to the state board and to the state DWR staff, and be proactive about feedback. And so some of the recommendations that we've provided is that for the indoor standards, we really wanted additional study, and we wanted better stakeholder engagement. Outdoor, we want to make sure the evapotranspiration adjustment really reflects efficiency, and that you know, we've seen a lot of challenges with the landscape area measurement information. Make sure the DWR is in a place that they can offer technical assistance before any sort of enforcement effort starts. CII classification categories, you know, we want to make sure those are reasonable, because you know, those can cost a lot of time and money to try and classify the CII. And then focus on new development for dedicated irrigation meters. Again, the conversion of irrigated meters can be costly and not always cost effective in the best managed practice. Bonus credit, we just want to make sure that water in meets the water out. And then variances, we're looking for reasonable calculations applicability. And the water supply and demand assessments, we provided some examples to DWR, and we're hoping that they'll kind of fold that into their requirements in their guidebook moving forward. Next slide, please. So just to dig a little bit deeper into the indoor water use efficiency numbers, we were going to go over this at the last meeting, and we actually ran out of time. Next slide, please. So the draft report was released in May, and comments were due in June, and they made some pretty dramatic changes to the indoor standards than what's currently in legislation. 2020, they stayed at 55 gallons per capita per day. 2025, they dropped it from 52.5 down to 47 gallons per capita per day indoor. And 2030, they dropped it from 50 gallons per capita per day to 42 gallons per capita per day. So it's a pretty significant decrease, and it's actually based on the 25th percentile of what current water use is. So next slide, please. You know, this is kind of showing, this is the 25th percentile is at the 2020 distribution. 25th percentile is at 43. So for them to be pushing this down to 42, it's gonna require a lot of work for a lot of agencies across the state. Next slide, please. Again, here's kind of just some where the current standards are now, where the proposed standards would be. So if you kept it at, you know, the 50 gallons per capita per day right here, you'd probably saving about 150 acre feet per year. If you go down to 42, you're saving, they're estimating 350,000 acre feet per year. But what they haven't figured out is what's the cost of that additional savings. I mean, you're already saving, you already have savings with that 50 gallons per capita per day in 2030. is it really worth it to go down to 42 and save that extra water? And what is the cost, not only to agencies that have to meet that standard, but to recycle water systems and wastewater systems and water systems? Next slide, please. So, like I said before, there were quite a few limitations of the study that they did. They didn't really evaluate best practices. They just said some agencies are meeting these lower numbers, but they didn't have an explanation as to why they were lower numbers. They identified several consequences with really not putting any sort of cost to those consequences. So no quantification. They just said that, you know, there could be impacts, but they didn't explain, you know, if the target was at 50, these are the impacts. If it's a 42, these would be the additional impacts. They kind of went dark last fall and before they came out with this study in May, and really had limited stakeholder engagement. And there was a lot of interest in trying to engage with CWR, and we didn't get a response. There was no financial analysis or feasibility. What would it really take to get this demand down to that 42 gallons per capita per day by 2030? And limited analysis about long-term indoor water use and how things can be changed. There were some assumptions that water use would go down over time, but they didn't look at things like how water use would change with more people working from home, or how water use might change if you don't have new development in your area. And then population assumptions were based on the 2010 census and American Fact Finder, and not using the more updated 2020 population information. So, you know, if that's off even like 10% or 5%, you can have a significant change in the information. So, next slide. So next steps, we sent it, AWWA sent in a comment letter. The Water Authority sent in a comment letter. They had their workshop on May 21st. And what we're really looking for is additional study, you know, that there should be some sort of look at what residential end use is existing, why people are at the indoor use that they are at, looking at the impacts of reducing the indoor number to water reuse, water waste in other areas. How feasible is it to really, you know, go in and replace every 1.5 gallon toilet with a 0.8 gallon toilet? You know, replace all the washing machines, replace all of the dishwashers. And then what could change water use over time, you know, especially if you're in an area that doesn't have a lot of new development and may have more people working from home. Next slide. I think that might be it. And that's it. So with that, I think we'll go ahead and turn it over to Nate. Again, we'll have time for questions, and I'll be available in one of the chat rooms later. And we can go over questions and answers then. So with that, Michelle, you're going to introduce Nate?
Yes, I will. So thank you very much for that description on residential. So our next topic, as Elizabeth said, is to talk a little bit about landscape. So we have Nate Adams from Santa Margarita Water District. He has 15 years of experience in water resources and efficiency sector, working for water utilities in Southern Orange County. His role as water efficiency reliability planning manager is he has privilege of working and supervising in GIS, water efficiency, cross-connection departments, which means he gets to spend a lot of time creating and looking at maps of where water is used. So with that, thank you so much, Nate, for joining us, and we look forward to your presentation.
Excellent. Hey, thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Elizabeth, for the opener on the overall water use objective. And so what I'd like to do is hone in on the landscape component, but then also provide this group the opportunity to use a model where I've tried to take each individual and do a composite holistic look at what might be an agency's actual objective. That way they can compare their actual water use or forecasted water use against scenarios of different objectives and different standards and variables that one might have the joy or frustration of inputting into the model. And so it's a real use example of all these things that are kind of out there in the ether. You know, we're all talking esoterically about landscape area measurements and what does it mean. It's a tool to help you kind of hone in on what does it mean. And so with that said, next slide, please. This is the salesman in me. This is what the model is, and I'll come back to it. And in the breakout rooms, I will model it. We can enter in some data. I'll show Santa Margarita Water District's data. And this is me trying to estimate far right, what is our actual water usage compared to what actually might be the objective based on the indoor budget that Elizabeth just mentioned, the outdoor residential, the CII dedicated to irrigation, water loss, et cetera, et cetera. Next slide, please. So first of all, who and what is Santa Margarita Water District? I know that it's very fortunate, very nice to be able to talk to my colleagues down in San Diego. We're on the very southern border of Orange County with San Diego. And primarily we're a master planned community. So just like the northern development areas of San Diego, it's a very bedroom community oriented. You can see all the stats there. It's always good for context, just comparing of, you know, who and what an agency's talk and what have they been able to accomplish, what are they doing. In total, we have just short of 60,000 connections. And our supply, we're very much reliant on Metropolitan for imported water. But that said, our total supply, we have about almost 25% of it with recycled water. And of course, that's for our shared common areas, landscaping, parks, medians, etc. But really for this talk, the key thing for me to hone in on is the fact that the district went through implementing a budget-based rate structure back in 2014, 2015. And I came to the district in 2014, and my first goal really was to obtain all of the area measurements for both the single family customer class, which was going to the budget-based rates, along with our dedicated irrigation meters, because they too were also going to be given the budget-based rates. So every month, each particular service, whether it's a residence or a dedicated irrigation, they're given a monthly budget primarily dictated on how much landscaped area they have. So that's what I want to go in and hone in on for the benefit of this group today. Go through some of the questions, open-ended questions that we all have, and provide you at least one working agency's thoughts on how they're trying to A, respond to what DWR has provided, and B, offer an alternative. So next slide, please. All right, so let's get real here. This is looking at a community, and what's nice about this is the Las Flores community, and it is completely master planned. So it's a microcosm of our service area in totality. And what I have outlined here for you are all of the residential parcels. And I'm sure at this point, everyone has looked at DWR's provided landscape area measurements and all the various shape files that their consultant was able to provide. So in one of those shape files, you know, it's going to give you, and primarily I want to focus on the A_UID_summary, that shape file. It's going to hone in on what DWR deems as being the residential parcels that are going to be assigned a landscape area measurement. And when I air quote the residential, you know, in my service area, and typically there's 3 flavors of residential, and outlined here are, or highlighted here are those 3 types. You know, we all can think of the white picket fence, single family residence. Okay, easy, right? 1 meter, 1 parcel, very known, obvious situation there. And I'll cut right to the chase. There really isn't much arguing with DWR on how and what determines the irrigable area on a single family residential parcel. Again, 1 meter, let's just go caveat most all meters, or a 1-to-1 issue with the parcel. The second flavor of residential development are what we can call condominiums or townhomes, where they primarily, you still have one individual owner or tenant, but it's 1 meter that serves that condo or townhome. However, a lot of times in master developments, when the builder and their developers is making that they're assigned one master APN, and many times that master APN is covered in that land use code. And I'll share with you how that has a knock-on effect with DWR approach to coming up with irrigable areas for the condo slash townhome type of residence. And then the third main type, you could think of those as commercially maintained apartments. And these might have individual meters, or they might have one master common meter that serves multiple units within one building. So outlined here or shown here are those three different examples show up throughout our service area. The one neat, or no, I shouldn't say neat, one of the unique things though, and this is where a water utilities methodology about how it classifies and bills its customers definitely differs from how DWR approached coming up with landscape areas. And DWR had to approach it with the best available information they had, and that is county assessor parcel data. And that's all predicated on land use codes. I won't say, I imagine there are some billing systems that use land use codes, but from what I know of and have been exposed to in the water utility world, most billing systems do not align with land use codes. So what that means is that the type 2 and 3, those condos and those apartments typically have dedicated irrigation meters that are irrigating the common areas throughout those developments or sub-developments. And if you can hit to the next slide, the next image will show up. And superimposed on the image to the left, I've added the known drawn irrigated areas for all of the various dedicated irrigation meters that serve this entire community. And the blue indicates potable water, dedicated irrigation, purple, recycled water. And then the nice thing is I didn't add in the specific points to show where all the dedicated irrigation meters are. But again, we all know that that's not aligned on a one-to-one parcel. You can have a one-to-many kind of a meter serving many parcels, or you can have many meters serving one parcel. So it's messy, right? It's messy. But what I want to emphasize here is if you look over several of these condos that I've pointed out and these apartments, they're covered and irrigated by dedicated irrigation meters. So that's a very unique situation that manifests itself later. Next slide, please. All right, so this is take a step back, right? Elizabeth did a good job of setting this up. All of the different standards that add up to a utility's total annual water use objective. And I blatantly stole this directly from DWR because I did not want to misrepresent what they are promoting. And in, we're attending all these workshops, and off to the right there, I have the words supplier needs only to meet total water use objective. And they are very quick and very good at saying that. And they're right. A utility, and hit the next slide, please, if you don't mind. Every utility only needs to compare its actual water use in any given year to that annual water use objective. You don't need to worry yourself, allegedly, on individual standards, so long as you meet that total. However, I'm going to get on a soapbox for a hot second, and I'm going to show you why. I think that's a bit disingenuous, and what an agency absolutely should concern itself with how it's doing on just one of the standards. Any one of these 4 or 5 standards, you very much need to pay attention to how you're performing against that, because that's setting you up for success or failure. Next slide, please. All right, so let's go over some of the known issues that we have uncovered here in our service area. First of all, let's get the big one out in the open, right? So when I compare our known landscape area measurements for both the residential area and our dedicated irrigation, DWR submittal is only 1/3 of what we know we have. The big issue is because if you look at the bottom of that table there, when I add up those 2 major customer classes, we have over 7,000 acres. Now, I will admit that DWR's charge here is really just to give us the residential landscape area measurements. And so if you look at that first line, if I compare what I know we have of just over 2,000, it's pretty close to what DWR's provided me. However, and here's the bummer part of this, Their number, there's two things going on. One, when I report just over 2,100 acres for Santa Margarita Water District, I'm only reporting single family residential. That's only single family residential, whereas DWR's is single family plus multifamily. And the reason for that is I tried to indicate before that our multifamily developments are actually irrigated by dedicated irrigation. So that number's picked up on my dedicated irrigation number. Moreover, what I'm showing now is I've gone up to north, and this is the city of Rancho Santa Margarita. And all of the pink polygons represent parcels that DWR has identified and given a landscape area measurement to. However, they've omitted, so throughout all of our service area, they've omitted all of those condos and townhomes. They have not been included in DWR's landscape area measurements. And again, it really gets back to the land use code issue. And on the assessor's level issue, the APNs, the individual condo and townhomes are, they have unique APNs. However, DWR took the master APN, which does not have a land use code. Hence, it was coded a void. And so there was no landscape area measurement to do on that. So that's a known issue. DWR is aware of it, but I wanted to flag it for the San Diego County agencies, particularly master planned communities. I think this might be a big issue for you as well. So that's a known issue. Another known issue we all know of, but it's still true. DWR is hanging their hat on the aerial imagery. I believe it's from 2017, 2018. It's one of those. Either way, it's a point in time. And obviously we aren't in a point of time. We continue, and land and utilities or water districts that have known growth since 2018, that landscape area is not going to be represented by DWR's measurements. And so I know that we have nearly 2,000 single family residential parcels, along with additional landscaped area on the CII side since 2017 that's not included. And then the huge one, dedicated irrigation, right? And I know that there's going to be a continued dialogue on that. But if you go ahead and hit the next slide, please. I want to really flag dedicated irrigation. It's an important issue for multiple reasons. Again, DWR has not determined what a utility's landscape area is for its dedicated irrigation meters. And to their credit, how could they, right? They don't know what is being watered. And here's a running joke too, when it gets to recycled water, right? My map here, I've showed, so from an aerial view, DWR does not know what I know. And this is a local specific knowledge that only comes with time of knowing who your customers are and where water is applied. So I know we've taken the time to map and measure where all of our dedicated irrigation meter coverage areas are. Moreover, because that area is directly tied to our billing system, we know what kind of water is being served there. So I know where recycled water is, indicated by the purple polygons. I know where potable irrigation is, blue polygons. So for those of us who are also kind of indicating that, and well, let me put it another way. If we know that the state is going to use the MWELO, MWELO standards, well, we know that MWELO calls out for special areas, landscape areas, and one of those is recycled water. And when you have recycled water in MWELO, you're given an ET adjustment factor of 1.0 versus a 0.7. And so the real question is, if an agency, or if this, and particularly the state, if you don't know what area is being given to recycled water, how can you appropriately capture that benefit of having a 1.0 ET adjustment factor? So it's a very important issue that an agency must flag for itself. Next slide, please. Just doing that because we know it. One of the huge things, so this is significant. If we were to only go with a 0.7 ET adjustment factor for all dedicated irrigation, regardless of water type, we would be losing, if you will, around 4,500 acre feet in our dedicated irrigation landscape budget. So say it another way, knowing where your areas are of recycled water and gaining credit and applying that 1.0 ET adjustment factor to only that landscape area that's using recycled water, an agency might be able to then apply that 1.0 credit. And in doing so, we would gain 40% more budget, or 4,500 acre feet. And that's significant. Next slide, please. All right, so the model, and then we'll do this in the breakout room, but I wanted it to flag it for all to see. And my hope is that Elizabeth will share it. This is a simple Excel model. I'm happy to answer questions on it. And what an agency can do is, and this is the left side where you're going to play with the landscape area. If you have your own area, terrific, use it. And you would enter that into the top areas. If you don't, use DWR, start there, and down in the far bottom right, you could input it there, it'll populate. And you can play with the various different objectives and variables like the ET adjustment factors. Use the rainfall that you have, use your effective rainfall percentages. Like Elizabeth mentioned, you can play between 55, 47, or God forbid, 42 gallons per capita per day. You can plug in your population. And here's a huge thing we're not talking about. Population, there's multiple errors and estimates with that. So you can adjust that by 5%, whether you want to go up or down by 5%, and see what that does for your agency's budget. And you can compare it against your actual water use. So if you do this, if you use the model, I would again encourage you to just start with basic residential. It's the simplest, easiest, cleanest. And then if you have your dedicated irrigation, start in to move there, because it's very important. I'll show you why. Next slide, please. And I'll end with this. So this is the model's conclusions, if you will, where based on all those variables that you just saw on the previous slide and based on your landscape area, you can calculate your indoor budget. And these are Santa Margarita water numbers based on the variables right now. And this is what's concerning me. Because if you look at that residential area, I've got an indoor budget of almost 10,000 acre feet, and that's using the 55 gallon per capita per day. I've got an outdoor budget of just over 6,400 acre feet. Add that up, we're talking 16,000 acre, add that up, sorry, I didn't show it, but what I've done in the yellow, I've entered my actual district's fiscal year 20, since all of us have our urban water management plans now. I would suggest use those numbers to help you populate that. So I know that our residential actual water use was just over 16,000 acre feet. Well, if you compare the actual use on the residential side only to the residential budget, both indoor and outdoor, out of the gate, Santa Margarita Water District's customers, residential customers, are at 102% of budget. And I haven't stated it, I didn't show it, but I know if you look at your urban water management plan, you look at your SBX 77 performance, everyone knows we've all done exceedingly well in lowering water use. And so out of the gate, completely discounted are all the efforts that our residential customer class has done to achieve efficiencies. That's a scary proposition. And again, I go back to the state's recommendation that you don't need to worry about each individual bucket. No, absolutely we do. It's disingenuous to say that you don't need to. I've also added in our CII, and this is where the district makes it up. If I add in our dedicated irrigation budget against actual usage, and that's that next block, if you will, you can see that our CII DIM water use is 69% of its budget. So that's where we make up the headroom. I've added the water loss factor, and I'm excited to hear from Amy Talbot on that. I'm using the UARL, but again, I have an open question for myself in this group is, what might be that standard that ultimately we use? But again, I've used UARL here. You can input if you get the potable reuse credit, but ultimately, at the end of the day, If I were to start this objective now, you can see that our total water use objective without a credit is just over 33,000 acre feet. Our fiscal year 20 water use was just short of 29. So we're at 87% of our budget going forward. And we know that we've made incredible inroads in efficiency, conservation, et cetera. It's a scary place to be. And I think this is the first time that we're able to start to like play with a tool to look at total water use and whatnot. So with that, I'll end it, and I'll be happy to answer questions in the breakout room.
Great. Thank you so much, Nate, for your presentation. So we are going to move on to our next presenter. Oh, if you have any questions, his contact info is provided. You will be given a copy of the slides. You will also be given a copy of the recording. If you have more questions for Nate, feel free to join him in the breakout room. Again, we will have 4 breakout rooms, one on each topic that you're hearing today. So Elizabeth will be in a breakout room on residential. Nate will be in a breakout room on landscape, and we're about ready to have our next speaker, which is Amy Talbot, and she will be covering a breakout room on water loss. And then we will also be having a breakout room on commercial, led by Lisa Madaus and myself. And I'm Michelle Madaus from Madaus Water Management and your moderator today. So our next speaker is Amy Talbot. She joined the Regional Water Authority, which is a collection of 20 water purveyors in the Sacramento region in November 2012. Amy is the manager of the Regional Water Efficiency Program and the award-winning public outreach campaign and school education program. Additionally, she is the California Nevada's AWA Water Loss Committee chair and has been actively engaged in the statewide process. So with that, thank you for joining us, Amy, and we look forward to your presentation.
Great, thanks, Michelle. Thanks for having me here. And if we could do next slide, please. Okay, so just to get us started, I wanted to go over a little bit of what's happened in the past and then kind of where we're at now. So for those that aren't familiar, all of this with the water loss regulation really started with Senate Bill 555 that was passed in 2015. It required a couple of things. The first was a level 1 validation of your water loss data through the UWUO audit platform, and that's for all urban retail water suppliers. The second part of Senate Bill 555 was adopting rules that require those same suppliers to meet performance standards of the volume of water losses. That has been interpreted by the state at this point to include real water losses. And then the second kind of part of that is that whatever those performance standards are, they shall employ full life cycle cost accounting to evaluate the cost and meet those performance standards. There's a big difference between what a full life cycle cost accounting is and cost effectiveness, which we can get into in the breakout room. But it's really important to realize that that's what's actually written in legislation. So after that bill is passed, state's been kind of engaging in an ongoing process that really still started ramping up in 2018 with the start of public meetings, talking about what this regulation would look like. And the water loss performance standard, which is going to be expressed in gallons per connection per day, fits into the Senate Bill 606 and the AB 1668 framework. It's one of the 4 components that we've been talking about. So again, the main thing we'll discuss today is this performance standard. It is going to be expressed in gallons per connection per day, which is included on the audit forms that everyone has to turn in every day. So it's basically turning your audit in, whatever that number is, you compare to what your budgeted versus what your actual is. And how the state's coming up with a performance standard is really based on an economic model that they've developed and then surrounding policy decisions. So I'll get into a little bit detail about both of those. Next slide, please. So starting off with the economic model, just wanted to let everyone know. So there's been some discussion about what type of model is economic model. And what it is really a transition model. You can see down there with a graph below, it's kind of like, I'm here now, the model says I need to get here, and then I maintain that over time. What it's not is an optimization model, which would say, what's my biggest bang for the buck? You know, how can I save the most water in the most cost efficient way? And that's not what this model is kind of built on. It does include the real loss component analysis, which some agencies are familiar with, which estimates, it's basically a deeper dive into the audit and helps you kind of prioritize what activities might be beneficial, and also estimates in a certain way water loss savings. So that's built in there, but again, it's surrounded by a ton of policy decisions. So I just didn't want to miss that component. And then it sets the target, again, at a future steady state of real loss. So once you reach the target, you have to maintain that same target over a 3-year rolling average going forward. So how does the model really work? The main crux of it is that it takes your cost data, it takes your water loss data, puts it all together, creates a benefit cost ratio, drags it out over 30 years. And then the magic kind of transition point, whether you go on to get a calculated target or you stay where you're at, is the benefit cost ratio. So if your benefit cost ratio according to the model is less than 1, you are required to maintain your current leakage. If your benefit cost ratio is equal or greater to 1, meaning your costs balance your benefits or your benefits outweigh your costs, then the model goes into a step 2 and calculates a water loss target for you. So you're either fitting into one of those buckets. It's like the decision point. Next slide, please. So, what does all of that mean? Basically, there are statewide costs and water loss defaults that are put into the model that help calculate that benefit cost ratio, and then I guess in the future, calculate your target. So the state has these default inputs. The good news is that you can change those inputs and customize them as long as you justify it to State Water Board staff. So you can change those things. Then the ultimate target will be set in 2023 after the model is finalized. Right now, it's not there yet. And you're required to meet that calculated target or maintain your current level of loss in 2028 and onwards, again, a 3-year rolling average. The other tricky part is that you will get a water loss target for all of your systems. So let's say you're one agency, but you have 3 separate areas with 3 separate hydraulically separate systems. Maybe one's groundwater, maybe surface water, maybe another groundwater, but they're all under the umbrella of one supplier name. Then you would have 3 water loss targets that would then be rolled up according to some ratio, and then you would have one supplier-wide target to meet. So you wouldn't have to meet those 3 individual system targets, but just one as an overall supplier. So that gets a little confusing. Next slide, please. So what we have here is basically a graph or a table, actually, of what do the targets look like. We put all of the publicly available audit data for the 400 plus suppliers and ran the default values. Remember, you can change those, but the state's just calculating these targets based on default values now. What do those targets look like? So you can see here the percent reduction categories, the number of agencies that are in those categories, what percent that represents the total. And you can kind of see that a lot of agencies, 119 suppliers must reduce their real loss by more than 50% in 5 years. So, and then 157 suppliers are required to maintain their current loss. So it's kind of split in a way. It's like almost half are, having to maintain, but then, another 30% have to do significant reduction in loss in a very short time period. Next slide, please. Another way to look at that table is with this chart. So you can see here, and the blue is the average real loss of all the 400 agencies from 2017 to 2019 audit data, all accumulated. That's where everyone's at now. You can see the breakout in real loss and gallons per connection per day there at the bottom. The green bars represent the real loss standard as applicable in 2028. So let's say no one changes any of the inputs, the default inputs, in the model. You can see there's a significant shift in the targets and real water loss, again, over a small time frame. Next slide, please. So given what we know about the model, and happy to go into detail much later, but it's pretty complicated. We're still kind of considering, okay, how do we, given where we're at in the process, how do we continue to improve the economic model to make sure that every supplier has a realistic and implementable water loss target? We know that the state at this point, because we've been going at this a couple of years, is unlikely to make substantial changes to the model itself. But we have come up with some quick and somewhat easy suggestions to provide to the state, saying, hey, maybe you can't do a complete overhaul, but maybe you can do a couple of things and maybe have more limited impact, but at least it's something. So we've listed a couple of things here that we're trying out. We're working with WSO to provide a sensitivity analysis on what these changes would do, again, using the default data, and see, are some of these worthy of pursuing? We don't really know. And so that's something we're entertaining right now, again, with WSO and the Water Loss Coalition. And we have presented some ideas to the State Water Board, staff, and board at this time. One of the main issues with the model is that there's really no intuitive movement between the variables. So if you go to play around with it and you change your variable production costs, nothing moves, nothing changes. So the relationships that are built in the model are not really kind of in an intuitive way. And so I don't think we can improve that at the time, but I think just acknowledging that when you're using it, that it doesn't work how you might think it will work. Just so you don't get thrown off even more. And then I think most importantly, the way you can improve the model is to put your own data in and essentially change the dynamics of the model, because you're not relying on the default data, you're relying on your own utilities data that you put together. We know a couple of inputs in particular have increasing impact on the 2028 target. That's the infrastructure condition factor, the rate of rise of leakage, avoided cost, leak detection frequency, and a couple more, but those are the 4 that we know to hone in on and to start with. And then you can customize those, kind of package it together, and then submit it to State Water Board staff for approval. And the last thing to do to improve the economic model is to improve your audit data quality. The economic model baseline starts with your agency's audit data from 27 to 2019 right now. So if you have any questions of like, I don't know, we had some changes, we went back and retested the meter, we think, this is here, we should change that. I would heavily consider going back and making sure that that data is as clean, crisp, and accurate as possible. Next slide, please. And you can submit audit data kind of redos to the state as well. Okay, so that kind of sums up a little bit about the model. The second part of things is that model exists within this policy realm. And the idea with the policy decisions is to try to work with the way the model is designed to accommodate some kind of extraordinary cases, or to help the suppliers that are going to be on the two ends of, high or low target. It's basically to like provide some relief, knowing that no model is perfect and that there are some policies that maybe need to do a little cleanup work. So one of those things is what we're calling the compliance plan. It would be for agencies that have a target that is causing them to reduce 30% or more from their baseline use. They would have to meet a certain cost ratio threshold. They would need to commit to improving data validity scores, and they would need to show the state that they have tried at least to customize the model. And then with that, you would go to the state and you say, I can't make my target, but here are the 5 things I can do. And it's similar to a water quality kind of control plan, the compliance plan, similar kind of format. It's like, can't do this, but I can do these things. We're also working on trying to figure out what can be done for disadvantaged communities. And I think the slide is changing. Not sure. Oh, no. And we're also working on what to do for disadvantaged communities. Often they are not able to make their target just from budget constraints. Then for those agencies that have low levels of loss, what options do they have to maintain what they're doing already? So we're trying to revise some of the criteria that needs to be met according to the State Water Board's current proposal. And then there's the agencies that have a benefit cost ratio of less than 1. Remember, in the model, you either are less than 1 and you do current loss, or you're equal or more than 1 and you get calculated target. Well, inherently, when you have a benefit cost ratio of less than 1, the model is saying your current loss is not cost effective. Your costs are outweighing the benefits. So the idea with those agencies is to have them solve for 1, which would give them a higher target, which in theory would be more cost effective, and then still include the standard 5 gallons per connection per day buffer. So there's discussions about that. And then the ongoing need to customize data and to change your input from the default, and the process on how that works. We're trying to seek some clarity on that. Next slide, please. Okay, so summing up, that was a lot of information, but where are we at now? Formal rulemaking is set to start maybe this fall. We're hoping this fall, but we're not sure. There's an initial 45-day comment period, but it can last up to 365 days. I highly doubt that's going to happen, but you never know. And so what we're doing right now is we're really encouraging suppliers to review their audit data, go back in time, make sure their baselines for the model is accurate as possible, customize inputs for the model, because your defaults might not be giving you the most ideal target. Your customized data might provide a more reasonable, more implementable target. And then just in general, document everything you're doing for water loss and the cost. And we're like, why are we asking everyone to do that? Well, because the regulation isn't final. We don't know exactly how this is going to land. That model, may calculate, and you as an agency might be like, oh, I just have to maintain my current loss. Well, we don't know if they're going to make changes to the model. We don't know where the model is going to land. So, where your target is now might not be where it ends at the end of that 45-day comment period. So I definitely encourage everyone to stay engaged in this process. And, I've been told many times by a lot of agencies that maintaining their current level of loss is still going to be hard. So I don't feel like we're out of the woods with this one yet. And then just know in the background, we're working on policies and the model tweaks that we talked about in the presentation with State Water Board staff and board members to try to help the outlier suppliers with the targets to make sure that collectively as a group, we get somewhere we can live with. And then finally, last slide, next slide, please. I just wanted everyone to be aware of this UC Davis water loss study, water loss data study. They did an assessment of all of the audit data that is used for the baseline of the model itself. And they essentially concluded that the available data used for setting water loss reduction standards is improving but not accurate. They're basically saying, we're not sure about the state or anyone using this audit data to calculate a regulation. And so that's kind of been an interesting twist in here, is that, we know that water loss data improves over time. And I think there is a lot of hesitation expressed in the beginning of this process that, it would be good to have a lot of flexibility built in because we know the data is improving. But that has been kind of formalized by UC Davis now. And then with that, we've got, I think that's the last slide. And I think we're doing questions in the breakout group. So you can enjoy one of our water efficiency ads.
Great. Thank you, Amy, for that presentation. So again, if you have any questions, feel free to join Amy in the water loss breakout room. So with that, we have our next speaker, and that is Lisa Madaus from Madaus Water Management. She has 24 years of experience in water resources and the efficiency sector. Lisa is passionate about water and her work across the state, improving water utilities, water efficiency. She specializes in drought planning, water loss audit validation, water demand forecasting, including climate change analysis, and commercial water efficiency. She's currently helping the Department of Water Resources with the commercial portion of the legislation. We're doing the best management practices, but today we're going to be focusing on the CII classification and dedicated irrigation meters. So with that, I'll turn it over to Lisa, and thank you for your presentation today.
Thank you, Michelle. So for those of us that haven't met us, Michelle and I are sisters. We frequently get asked that. And yes, we've been really busy working on urban water management plans and on the CII water use efficiency aspect of the new California way of life. There is a portion of the legislation that covers this. We went over it in past workshops, but I'm focused on today what the latest update is. So I'm just going to give you a brief 5-minute overview and answer a lot of questions, have a dialogue in our breakout session. But there is an annual water use report filing requirement in the legislation. It will start January 1st, like others. It is not there's elements that are calculated. I'll explain in a little about the water use objective. But fundamentally, it's about documentation of performance measures in CII water use, and supporting data is what you'll be asked for in the annual reporting. So understanding what the requirements are could lead to, effort upon your agency to document your efforts, have an active CII program, and be meeting the goals of the program. But it won't have a formal standard in some senses in terms of water use savings because of the economic element. They don't want to constrain commercial growth in your service area. So the scale of this is a little different. It should become clear because we talk more. Next slide. So if you're feeling a little overwhelmed by all the elements of the water use objective, that's because there are a lot of them. This is an image that DWR has been sharing. They're going to plan to use it in their legislative report that's due in October, that they're attempting to track and get stakeholder input feeding into preparing that draft. The blue elements are the ones that are calculations related to the water use objective. The gray are next. Can you do the next arrow for me, Hannah? So the topics for today are really on CII best management practices. Then the classification system is one of the performance measures called out in the legislation. And also that there's a threshold and there's more CII dedicated meters, and there's a few strategies for that I'm going to touch on. And this was all part of a discussion yesterday that was recorded and is going to be posted on the SharePoint website along with a lot of background materials. Next slide. So the three principal areas for CII water use that are considered performance measures are that there will be a CII water use classification system that is more standardized, if you will, so that we have the ability to roll up and look at water use in the CII sector. The other element is best management practices, including water audits and water management plans are called out in the legislation for CII customers above a certain size, volume of use, or other threshold. These are recommendations from the CII task force, was also called out in the legislation. So DWR is beholden to kind of look at those recommendations and try and actualize them within principally the BMP practices part. Next slide. So the CII classification system, this slide was presented yesterday. They really have put three options on the table. The prior May, they actually had a more and a broader discussion, and the one actually in April as well put quite an attention to what a CII classification could look like and various options. They've distilled it down to these three. The first one is the one that generally is following the Water Research Foundation's approach and some analysis on aligning CI water use with different sectors. So that's the one with 17 categories. I would take a look at all of these, presuming that you don't have one in your billing classification system now. DWR is calling for what they would say, or you could develop what they label a crosswalk table or lookup table to generate this with the download from your billing system, for example, and do some categorization and then some roll up to help with your annual water use reporting. So they are assuming that you don't need to do a complete formal overhaul of your billing system. Some are more flexible than others, but you would need to explore this space and to come up with a solution. So what these options are and what they mean to your agency are important to uncover. Next slide. So the other part is that was in the blue section that was calculated is the outdoor irrigation element of landscape for CI, and that's included with dedicated meters. It calls for a minimum size thresholds or technologies that could be used in requiring dedicated meters on these properties to segregate out essentially, right, the indoor CI use from the outdoor. Next slide. So they also showed a couple options for this yesterday. Principal one being that there be different thresholds for who needs a dedicated meter. They're trying to set this, bar of what size properties, for example, on the acreage threshold or volume of water use going through the overall meter would need to have a segregated meter, or if there's some other, behavioral threshold that you might be able to estimate, like a MAWA water budget for the site that triggers a kind of that there's enough outdoor water use on the property to invest in a dedicated meter for that site. So these are the three options that they have for thresholds. Next slide. The optional approach is to have, instead of installing a dedicated irrigation meter, to have an equivalent technology kind of approach. So there could be measurements on site, such as submeters, focusing on water use efficiency parameters is number 2, like it has a smart controller and other improvements on site, water budget based allocation for the outdoor that you're really tracking that they're efficient on site could be equivalency. And then third is the combination of both, either remote sensing or some way to ascertain that they're being efficient on site, or some alternative metering program. There's kind of a mix of ideas there. But those are the 3 areas that the technology solution without having to create the dedicated irrigation meter. Recognizing some existing properties would be really difficult, right, to segregate the outdoor use and install a meter. So they're trying to look for alternatives to needing to do that. Next slide. So DWR could really use your input in this sector. They've had May 24th, we did a lot of breakout sessions and listening. They are beholden to put forth, recommendations for a CI classification system. Are there reasonable thresholds? What size agency even that should be required to do a CII classification system? What the classification system should look like, what would be most usable and feasible is on the table to be discussed. We are collaborating with them. We were asked to help with a technical white paper and be an objective voice on BMPs. We are very much, we distributed an outline for what that technical white paper would look like in May. We have so far received comments by one agency. We would really appreciate more feedback and comments about, we've done it kind of an annotated outline style. And if you think we've missed a topic that's important to your agency, or you have information for us or data about how you've collaborated with your CI customers or evaluated and targeted, what a survey or audit scheme that would look like for your agencies. For example, thresholds that you've decided, customers are worth your time and investment, or approaches, or contents on what a water management plan might look like, or we've even gotten feedback that a water management plan is not the right title. There's been a survey distributed. That survey was still live. We have not closed it, but we do intend to, as we mentioned before and given out the link, incorporate some of the findings in our white paper. So please comment. And then I just went over the CII dedicated meter part. Definitely worth your time and effort. There's some serious expense, you know, in those dedicated meters and any installation or retrofit program they might come up with, and it is part of the calculation of the water use objective. So comments go to the WUWE standards. There's a lot of information posted on the SharePoint site. There was discussion yesterday about distributing information outside the SharePoint site, just making sure everyone has access to the information that's being presented. So CII has some active participation, but we are, I know everyone's trying to catch up. And as you saw from the wheel, and the reason I put it up there is this is complex. There's just a lot of moving parts, so many. But we, this segment, even though less on the quantifiable side, definitely could lead to some significant investment, at least in labor and staff time, in addition to expense. So feel free to ask any questions, or I think I'm that's it for my little over 5 minute update. I do see a question, Michelle, in the chat. I don't know if we have time, 1 minute that I have on the agenda left, or.
Yeah, we actually do have time for just one question. So it said, with regards to the retrofit situation in DIM, it takes two to tango. What is DWR doing to assess the cost of a retrofit and who pays for it? The end user would have plumbing retrofits, perhaps a new meter and backflow charges, and if utility is supposed to pick up the full cost, utility plus customer costs, Prop 18 makes it interesting if all customers are paying for a specific customer's downstream side of meter improvements.
So this is a perfect question to submit to DWR. They are looking for cost effectiveness. This in particular, you know, the who pays, I think is almost a comment across the board, was why Amy was talking about the cost effectiveness in the economic model. I mean, we really need to have examples. That's part of the white paper. I would love to have examples posted up. We don't have good quantification case studies right now to talk about, you know, what it would take. And on the BMP list is Lanscape BMP's dedicated meters. That DWR does not have a good feel for the cost of what this was be and who would pay. And I completely agree with you on the Prop 218 cost of service and the equity issues and how we would address this. I mean, really much of this law is an unfunded mandate in many's view, as was SPX 7-7. So I would advocate that you turn this question in and provide any data that you can to back it up. I would say, you know, for our agency, we perceive it will cost X, Y, or Z. And really, if you're uncomfortable being named by agency or in our white paper, we don't have to name any agencies. We can just say supplier 1, supplier 2. We don't need to name names in any of the utilities. DWR has been very clear with us about that. And we are considering like sending targeted emails from people that we know that has information, because we really would appreciate more examples in the white paper to explain things just like this.
Great. Well, thank
But
you.
we
for
would,
that.
yeah, we feel we need your
Yeah.
release to kind of do that. We wouldn't just share. We're not going to share any information, but.
Yes. Okay, great. Well, thank you, Lisa. So the next phase of our workshop is to have some breakout rooms. So we will have all the speakers in different rooms. You should be able to join them. You're able to rotate between rooms. So right now they're unassigned. So it should come up on your screen. It says unassigned. And so then you are able to choose what room you would like to go to. Again, we have 4 rooms. We'll have Elizabeth in residential. We'll have Nate in landscape area measurement. We will have Amy Talbot in your water loss room, and we will have CII classification will be Lisa and myself. We will have approximately 30 minutes, and then we will come back and do share outs of the findings of what everyone discussed. So I hope you have a great time in your breakout rooms. Hannah from Medal's Water Management will be in the main room. If you have any challenges, feel free to connect with her. If not, I hope you have a great discussion. So welcome back, everyone, from your breakout rooms. I hope you had some really great sessions. We had a full 30 minutes to have dialogues, and I'm really looking forward to hearing the share outs. So there were 4 breakout rooms. So we'll go one room at a time. We'll go in order of the topics that we covered today. So that would make Elizabeth a residential group first. So either Elizabeth or someone in your group willing to do approximately about a 5-minute share out. Would be great about what you guys discussed.
Well, we had some very intimate groups. We had just a couple of people in the room. And so it really allowed for some exchange of really good dialogue and feedback. You know, we kind of talked about all the different components of data that are needed for all of these different standards, from trying to figure out how population is the 2020 census data is measuring up to the census or American Fact Finder data, and looking at what people are going to have to do to measure out their dedicated irrigation meters, and what kind of challenge that might bring. And then we actually had some discussion on the splitting of the meters. We had quite a bit of discussion on that. So kind of went off topic, but again, it was really good to get some one-on-one feedback and hear what agencies are really concerned with and struggling with. And again, the public versus private, what are you going to do and how you're going to pay for projects that are done on site. We talked about some of the benefits of CII audits and how those have been helpful. And then we also talked about, which is a good thing, how water agencies and cities could share information, or even how water agencies among different groups in departments could start sharing information that might be helpful in meeting these targets. So those are kind of what we covered, a real kind of broad range of topics. So.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Elizabeth. We talked about dedicated meters in our room too, so we'll get to that. But in the meantime, we'll go to Nate on landscape area measurements and your calculation tool. Are you sharing, or someone else in your group sharing? Be great to have a summary. I think you're on mute, Nate. I can see the little red thing.
Oh my God, you think in 2021 I'd figure this out?
All good.
Yeah, no, I'll share, and then I'll ask if Clay wants to add anything, because he was the most vocal in our group. But really, what I was offering our group was going through how one would enter information into the model that I built, and it's a pretty simple model, but just starting from scratch. If you've been given DWR's landscape area measurements, take that number, start using it, and you can then talk to your billing department. Or like I try to advocate for, consult the person at your agency who wrote or was tasked with compiling the water usage information for your most recent urban water management plan, aka what needs to be submitted by tomorrow. That's a great place to start to compare actual water use on the residential side to what's going to be calculated in this model on the indoor and the outdoor side. So just walking through how an agency could get this model blank and start to fill it out with DWR data or your own data. So Clay, did you have anything to add, since you had a couple good questions there?
I don't think so. I mean, I think you covered it pretty well. It's, it's a little bit of research, just finding the numbers to plug in, but I think the Excel spreadsheet's a pretty cool tool. Yeah,
good deal. And as everyone's mentioned, there's so many variables and uncertainty. What's nice about the tool is just that limbo, right? Of how low can you go? What's the appropriate level for your agency to go down? I think it helps you kind of start to address those questions.
Right. If there's nothing else from your group, thank you so much for the share out, both of you. So the next room would be water loss regulation, and that was led by Amy Talbot. I don't know if you're going to give a summary if you're someone in your group.
I will give a summary. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. So we covered a couple of topics. The first was one agency thinking about submitting a customized ICF infrastructure condition factor, and kind of the pluses and minuses of doing that now versus after the formal rulemaking process is over. You know, there's not too many inputs that actually move the target, the output, the 2028 target. And so, you know, focusing on those inputs that really do tend to have a desired outcome is a good thing. However, the ICF is one of those, but it's also very hard to document and to calculate and to submit enough data to kind of justify that change. So it's a balance of, you know, hey, are we okay where we are with our default values, or should we take the time and submit that customized and target, or customized input rather, to get a target adjustment, and the approval process from the State Water Board, how is that going? So that took some of our conversation. And then the other was just, you know, an agency that had a benefit cost ratio of less than 1. So they're maintaining their current loss, but that itself is actually pretty difficult. And so you can try to change the inputs of the model as much as you can, but, you know, sometimes you can't. And so you're stuck at your current loss, but in order to maintain that, you still need to do things. And so there was discussion of, you know, how can we still work with what we've got and provide that feedback to the State Water Board. So we talked about some strategies on doing that during the formal rulemaking, and how to better kind of prepare for that to start in order to express opinions. And then just finally, just the inherent uncertainty with the water loss you know, regulation process, which I think is systemic to all of these, but just kind of discussing a little bit about that.
Great. Thank you, Amy. Anything else or anyone else from your group want to share, or we'll move on to the last group? Okay. Thank you very much for water loss share out. So the last group we had was the CII classification and dedicated irrigation meters. That happened to be the room that I was in with Lisa Medaus, and we had a volunteer from our group. Vince is going to chime in with a summary, and then other people are welcome to share too. Go ahead, Vince.
Well, first off, Michelle, Lisa, thank you for giving me our group a pretty good background on what the CII standards were. But I think starting at the very beginning of the DWR primer, which showed the 3 specific things as far as what the CII standards would be, that was helpful. You know, just one, knowing the different classifications of customers, whether it's a restaurant, retail, hospital, car wash, a mechanic shop, like they're all just knowing what they are, so that we know how to reach out to them and basically categorize them. The other one was the second was the best management practice, which was just what is it that we should be doing to evaluate or reach out to these types of customers. And then the third, which was the standard for the dedicated irrigation meter. And that took up a lot of the discussion, but that was definitely pretty fascinating and a little bit heated, just because we all vary so much on what we have. You know, we have mixed use commercial, and you know, the whole thought of when do we say that it's going to have to switch to a dedicated irrigation meter? Like, is it a square footage? Is it a usage? That sort of stuff. But then really also talking about the total costs for getting a dedicated irrigation meter. So, you know, if a customer met that criteria and they had to split, you know, what was it? And Cooper from Contra Costa, who's on the group, was able to put a pretty good cost sheet together on what it is. And it's not just district costs, but also customers. So, you know, you've got your meter costs that they're paying bi-monthly or monthly, the capacity costs, the installation costs, but then also the cost the customer has to face if their irrigation systems tied into, you know, all sorts of different private areas. So it was just a good discussion. It just sounds like a lot of expense for a very little amount of water use. Like where I work, it's 15% of our overall demand. I've been at places where it's been the CII is 5%. So, you know, how much are we forced to really chase this?
Great, thank you. That was an excellent summary, Vince, and thank you for volunteering to do the share out. Anybody else in the group want to share? I see you, Cooper. Did you want to share something?
Vince covered it pretty good.
Okay, great.
You did a nice job. I think the only thing was maybe Lisa Quaylar's point about the BMP 1.3 tool. And
Yeah.
I don't know if Lisa wants to share a little bit about that idea, but that was a really good one too.
Hi there. Yeah, I can chime in really quickly. So as I was noting, this kind of predates me, but the former California Urban Water Conservation Council put out a feasibility tool. It was an Excel-based tool for agencies to assess the cost effectiveness of splitting meters on large CII accounts. And so we have been considering reviving that tool and asking for volunteers to input updated cost data and assessing, you know, what the cost burden would be on the water agency side of things, but also on the customer side of things. I'm just getting up to speed with the tool. This is a recent development. So more to come, and but just wanted to put out there that we are looking into that possibility of reviving that tool and getting some new numbers.
Yeah, thank you. Vince, you did a really nice summary, and Lisa too. I think the call is for examples, like Cooper, you know, shared some of his numbers from his agency. The more that we can explain with quantifiable examples, the better. And I'm just going to reiterate Michelle and I's ask on the white paper, like, please participate with Lisa and CalWEP and Cooper, Vince, anyone. Nick too is on our call talking about specifying like what triggers, you know, thresholds and costs and things. Like the more you can help us. I mean, we've explained conceptually, you know, but it's all going to be about illustrating and examples and, you know, what works and what doesn't work. So the more that you can help us, back us up with, you know, technical numbers to explain this, then just, I think the higher the thresholds, the narrower the focus on water efficiency that we really want to go after for conservation potential, like Vince said, is perfect. That's where we want to be, is we want to be pragmatic, right? And so the more you can help us carry that message, the better.
Great. Thank you, Lisa. So I am going to turn it over to Elizabeth. We have one last slide. Thank you so much for participating in the breakout rooms. Clearly, we had some great dialogue and some great participation. So thank you very much for coming today. I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth, and she's going to do our wrap up.
All right. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. So again, we appreciate all of you for coming and for all the great feedback that we got, and the, you know, the more that we hear about your concerns and your specific examples, I think it's better informs all of us as we kind of work with DWR and the state and on developing these standards. So we really appreciate it. We have another workshop scheduled for August 10th. We haven't really come up with a specific agenda for that one, but I think we're going to probably do it similar to this one. We're going to have several different topics. If you're interested in hearing something specific that we haven't covered, or even that we have covered but you want additional data on it, contact either me or, you know, Joni from the Water Authority or Efren, and
or you can feel free to put it in the chat too.
Or put it in the chat.
If it's on your mind, you're here. If there's more topics that you would like to hear, or if you liked the breakout room format and you want to see that again, please let us know. And then we're happy to listen. So feel free to open up your chat and say, I would like more on, you know, X topic. You know, we're kind of going to listen to you, you know, that are coming and participating, and keep the dialogue going.
And DWR has shared with us that they're reviewing August like a catch-up month. They know they've done a lot. They've asked a lot. They've put a lot of stakeholder information out there in the SharePoint site. So August is maybe a good opportunity for us to catch up together on all this and kind of, you know, spend some time in particular topic areas that are most interesting to you. And it's, yeah, advantageous to your agency. That'd be really helpful.
Yeah.
So great. With that, we are ending right on time. Oh, someone put something in the chat. So we're going to start that. So one person went in. So if there's others that would like to chime in, take a minute. We've got another 2 minutes in our time, but we'd love to hear from you. And or if anybody has one last question, happy to address it. If not, we hope you put that date on your calendar, and we hope to see you again. This will be recorded, so if you saw something that you would like to hear or share it with someone else, the slides will be provided and the recording will be provided as well. So we hope to have you back again. Any last words, Elizabeth? Or
And we will be sending out Nate's spreadsheet to anyone that's on this call. So
yes,
yeah.
And feel free. Each person had contact information at the end of their slides, and feel free to reach out to them with the questions on their individual topics. And thanks everyone for the speakers and for coming. It was a great session. So
thank you, Nate.
The dialogue. Great. All right. Well, thank you so much. Hope you have a great afternoon and hope you join us for our next workshop in August.
Thank you.
Thank you.